We want to welcome you to the Customer Success webinar series brought to you by ClientSuccess. We are broadcasting live from the base of the beautiful mountains in Silicon Slopes, Utah. I'm Burke Alder, Vice President of Marketing and a Customer Success Strategist at ClientSuccess. I want to give you a warm welcome wherever you are in the world. ClientSuccess is a customer success management platform that helps leaders and customer success managers all over the world manage, retain, and grow their customer base. We do this by providing customer success teams real-time customer insights, communication, and collaboration across the customer journey or life cycle. During today's webinar, we will hear from Greg Daines, founder and CEO of Client Velocity. Greg has been dubbed the Churn Whisperer for his success in helping organizations drive customer success with new strategies that cut to the core of what truly impacts clients to stay with SaaS organizations. Greg has over 20 years of experience in customer success. We are excited to have him on this month's Customer Success webinar. He will be covering a new innovative and fun concept backed by research about asking one question that will change your customer success strategy. Today's webinar is designed to be collaborative. We encourage you to use the Q&A feature to submit questions. Greg and I will answer these questions during the presentation, and we will save some of the questions for the end of the session. We will be recording this webinar today, and it will be sent to your inbox as soon as possible. It's my pleasure to welcome today to the Customer Success webinar series, Greg Daines. Greg, we're excited to hear from you.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks, Burke. I appreciate it very much. I love these sessions and really appreciate Client Success and all they do to further the thought leadership in the industry and take a leading role in that. So congrats to you guys and all you do. So yeah, thank you. It's great to be here. So I'm going to frame this session a little bit around questions, because questions are so important, right? It's impossible to get good answers, right answers, if we're asking wrong questions. And it took me a long time to kind of connect this, but you've had this experience probably like I have, where you're struggling with something and the things you're trying aren't working and it's not driving the results you need. And I have decided that a lot of times what's happening there is that underneath our efforts are faulty questions. And I think this is exactly what's happened in the case of customer success. And so I want to explain. I think that what goes on often is that we're asking the wrong questions. And in the subscription economy, there's really two different ways that we think about growth, right? Because that's what customer success and churn really are about. They're about supporting the company's growth. And we essentially ask two questions, which make a lot of sense. They're very logical. The first is, why do customers buy? And we work on and optimize around that. And the second is, why did they leave? And the way we think about it is, look, if we could, optimize, improve, connecting with customers and driving their, tapping into their motivations for buying, we'll get more. And if we can address the reasons why they leave, we'll lose fewer. And the connection between those two is that we'll accumulate growth, right? The problem is, this is a trap, actually. And both of these questions can lead us into trouble. And so let me break them down one at a time, and I'll talk about why that is. So first question, why do customers buy? I mean, this is what sales and marketing are doing all the time, right? They spend all their energy, working out how to solve for this. It's their job, and, we aggressively reward them when they succeed at it. But there's a trap here. The problem is that not every reason to buy is equally valid. If you think about it at your own company, ask this question, are there, of all the reasons to buy, are some better than others in terms of the long-term outcome? So, if you think about all the different reasons, invariably some of those turn out to be really compelling. Those customers get good results and stick around for a long time. But others, well, let's just say there are some things our salespeople probably shouldn't promise or suggest to customers if we want to give them the best chance for success. Now, sometimes when I say this, people, react a little bit and say, well, hey, hold on. Who are we to judge? Any reason to buy is valid as long as it's valid to the customer. Who are we to judge, right? There's a problem in this. And to illustrate, I'll share a story. So I had a client approach me recently with a strange situation. They'd had a bunch of customers that were canceling, even though these same customers were reporting very high levels of satisfaction and NPS, et cetera. And, how could this happen, right? So they'd heard me talk about how customer happiness is not the, solution to customer success. And so they thought maybe I'd be the right person to figure out this dilemma. And I do love this kind of stuff, so I dived right in. And it turned out that there are a group of their customers whose reason for buying the solution was actually to meet a temporary need. They were very successful customers, actually, but they no longer needed the solution after, a few months. And so, what had happened was that the sales team had discovered that this particular need, this temporary need, was relatively easier to sell to. There were fewer things to consider. There was less of a commitment. That translated it into a faster and more efficient sales process. And so, here's one example, right? A compelling, potentially, reason for a customer to buy does not mean it's a compelling reason for them to still be there 2-3 years down the road. And that's a problem, particularly in the SaaS subscription economy that we live in, right? Essentially, our performance is a function of how long customers stay for the most part. And so it's really important. So there's one example, but there are actually many examples of this, right? So here's the way to kind of think about it intuitively on your own part. In your company, right? Think about if you've noticed that some reasons to buy are more durable than other reasons over the long run. This isn't usually a way we think about this, but it's a valid way to put some of these customer reasons to the test. Or think about, are there sales behaviors? Are there things that are being promised or allowed to be believed maybe in the sales process that you feel are associated with churn in your company? And I think if your experience is anything like mine, both of those are true. And so I can just assure you, it's really consistent. In all of the many companies that I've worked for or with, this has been pretty much universal, that different reasons have very different long-term outcomes. And okay, so that's the intuition, but I'm a data guy. I like to test our intuitions with data because I have found too many times over my career that our intuitions tend to be wrong or frequently are wrong. And so I've been gathering a lot of data on this over the last few years, and I've actually amassed a pretty big database. I think it might be the biggest one in the world. As far as I know, it is. It's got over 80,000 data points in it at this point. And it's really interesting because it has all of these customer details in there, and we're able to ask interesting questions. So I wanted to ask the data, are there differences, meaningful differences between the different reasons customers buy? And it turned out, actually, there are many. I'm only going to share two, which make the point well, and also it will keep us to our time. So here's the first one. It turns out that consistently, when you look at sales reps by sales performance, there's a huge disparity, right? There's always a few that just perform phenomenally higher than the rest, and this gap in performance is well known. So we wanted to ask, is it true for retention in the same way that it's true for sales performance? And it turns out it is true. In fact, consistently, a few sales reps have retention rates that far exceed the average of the remaining sales reps. And so this gap exists. And of course, both of those disparities exist for the same reason, and that is that a few sales reps have a distinctly unique sales process. And that process, how it connects with customers, et cetera, affects retention as well. Now, it's true, it's not always the ones with the highest sales performance that have the highest retention performance. Those don't necessarily match up, but the principle's the same. And what it tells us, the intuition is, there's something some sales reps do consistently that produces higher retention. And of course, we've spent time looking into these reps and what are they doing. And it's out of the scope for this presentation, but it's fair to say they're doing things that are very distinctly different consistently that do produce these results. And it's durable across segments and all sorts of things. So it's a really durable result, very interesting. Clearly something that's happening in sales, right, is powerful in driving results. Second data point is when we were able, in one data study, which is over 50,000 data points, we were able to separate the customers by essentially their reason to buy, their use case. And it was interesting. The question was, do some use cases or reasons to buy produce longer term retention? And the differences were really shocking, in fact. It mattered a lot which of the things they were tying their sense of success to. What was the thing they believed this solution would produce for them, and how well did that perform in long-term retention? I mean, it's massive. You can see having the right reason here was more than twice the retention of the worst reason. So clearly, these things matter. And if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense, actually, because when you close a deal, we're talking SaaS, subscription economy. When you close a deal, in a way, you haven't really accomplished anything. I mean, not to denigrate that process, because it's incredibly sophisticated and what they do is difficult and very important. But to make my point, we haven't earned anything, right? The subscription business is such that all you've really done, in fact, is introduce them into the mall, right? And everything that we earn from them over their lifespan will be about whether we were able to keep them in the mall and continue to sell them more stuff. So that's a little bit of a metaphor, but I think it makes this point that this process, how we sell, and particularly how we connect with the motivation of customers, has a profound long-term effect, which I think has been largely missed by the industry. There's a sense that you sell and then you retain, but it's not so clear. And I think most people intuit this, particularly people who've had experience in customer success. So I'm guessing some of you out there are basically nodding your head or thinking, gosh, that has been my experience, because it really is very common. So the point being that, look, the way we sell is actually one of the most important things for long-term success. So this is how I formulated it as a rule. Not all reasons that customers buy are equally valid reasons to stay. And how we sell, in my experience, and I have data to back this up, has a bigger impact on customer outcomes long-term than any other single thing that we do. So this is a really important, I think, kind of insight that to a certain degree changes how we think about this. And it goes back to that question, why do customers buy? Just answering that question doesn't necessarily create growth, because growth is the outcome of them buying and staying. Okay. All right. Let's look at the second question. Why do customers leave? Now, this one seems equally logical as the last one, and in fact, it has a similar kind of problem. So let me step into it this way. I'm sure many of you have had a similar experience that I've had many times, and that is we sort of gather information, we survey our exiting customers, and we ask them, why did you leave? What were the factors? And we bring all those answers back and we put them into categories, because they tend to be a lot of variety in them, and we put them into whatever number of slices, and we put that into a pie chart, and we pick, I don't know, the 2 or 3 biggest slices, and we go after solving those problems, those points of friction, as we should. And having done so, we come back and we look at our retention rates, and what invariably happens? I've done this so many times, and it's always the same. Churn doesn't really change all that much. Certainly not nearly in proportion to the level of those slices that we think we've resolved. And this is something I've done this over and over and over again, and really it took me a long time to kind of come to understand why this doesn't work. I now call it studying failure, and I'm convinced it's a dead end. And The issue is those reasons to cancel are actually also things that our most successful customers are experiencing. Actually, if you think about it, our most successful customers tend to use our solutions the most, right? They tend to use the most features, they tend to push them the hardest. And so it's not the case typically that our most successful customers haven't run into these problems. So the question that begs is, well, if they're running into the problems, why aren't they churning, right? What's missing here? This is confusing, and clearly there's something else going on here that matters. So think about it intuitively this way. You know, have you had a customer leave recently, cancel, and on the way out say very nice things about the experience they had and the company, right? I'm sure you're thinking of examples right now. Conversely, have you had, you know, a customer who's unhappy, frustrated, has a lot of very specific complaints, constantly complaining about the solution, but keeps renewing? I mean, what gives, right? These are universal experiences for people in customer success. And what it seems to indicate to me is that clearly complaining about things or running into trouble can't be the only factor that's driving churn, or even the most important one. So let's look at what the data says about this. It's fascinating, actually, because the data, what you find here is, I think, mind-blowing, because the data consistently shows that customers who complain are actually more likely to renew on average than those who don't complain. So if you divide them into those groups, it's the group that's not complaining that has the higher churn. And that's fascinating, right? It's not that complaints don't matter or the issues or friction they're experiencing don't matter. We absolutely should be addressing that, and shame on us if we don't. But what's this telling us? If you think about it, what it's really saying is they're engaged, right? This matters to them. If something isn't important, why bother to go through the trouble of opening a ticket and complaining or calling your CSM or whatever the process is? It's effort. And this is at least an indication that they're putting in the effort. It's an indication that they're engaged. So engagement clearly is more important. What we have to do is dig in. What's going on with engagement? So, you know, we often, well, here's another way that we looked at it in the data. So we divided a set of data, a really large data set, tens of thousands of customers, into these three groups. Customers who had never asked for an increase or decrease in their contract, those who had asked to increase their contract, that's upsell, and those who had asked to downsell. And we tend to think, you know, it's that no change group, everything's good, those customers are green. When we look at their retention, you know, it's not good, actually. This is a real clear indicator that lack of engagement is not a good sign. It doesn't mean the non-complaining customer is green, not at all. Well, let's look at upsell. Clearly, upsell is a great indication. They're very engaged. They want more. Honestly, I mean, what could be a more obvious signal that they're going to retain? And sure enough, they have very high retention, 93% in the data set we looked at. Now let's look at the downsell. This one's interesting, right? Here's a group that are asking for a reduction in their value of their contract. And most companies would put this in their health score as a negative, right? It's an indication, clearly, the customer's on their way out. They didn't get enough value, et cetera, et cetera. Let's look at their retention. It's actually the highest of all three groups. Now, not by much, but what's the point? What are they signaling when a customer calls to reduce their value of their contract? What's the signal they're sending, right? It's about engagement. They're saying this is valuable to us, but perhaps not at the level we initially thought. Maybe they found their perfect use case fit and they're right sizing it. It's certainly not an indication it doesn't matter. And you can see that here in the data. Calling to downsell is not an indication we didn't find any value. It's about connecting this with the value they did find. doesn't mean there aren't opportunities to upsell them again in the future. But I think the larger point to take away from this isn't that downsell's better. We certainly don't want to go out and put into place a policy where we're going to figure out how to downsell all our customers to increase our churn or reduce our churn. Obviously, that's not the objective. The takeaway from this is that engaged customers stay and disengaged customers don't. And clearly, just encountering issues that would lead to complaints or tickets, et cetera, is not actually the primary driver or indicator of success. So I have the rule, this is the way I say it, customers don't leave because they have a reason to leave. Customers leave when they no longer have a compelling reason to stay. All right.
Hey, Greg. Hey, this is Burke.
Yeah.
Hey, a few questions we've had pop up. One,
sure.
On regards to the data and the survey, was that USA or was that a global when it came to the?
It's a global database. I would say 90+% of the data is US data inside that database. So
That's
typical
great.
for a lot of SaaS companies in the US, typical weighting. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And then, hey, as you were going through the why customers leave, there was, I think, a proposed question, which was, I asked how many people out there had done why they leave analysis, and a lot of people were responding they were doing it monthly, and like you were mentioning that this is something kind of we do and we've kind of been taught to do. And then the follow-up question was, do those, those buckets you were talking about, those areas of why they leave, those were actually pretty consistent month over month. And so that's kind of interesting. I know you're tying this into the kind of the lead up to this ultimate question we're talking about, but those are just some things that could have been talked about on the side of this, the panel today.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's fascinating, right? I've done these exit analyses many, many times, but I can't point to a single time when we were able to move retention more than a point or two. It's not that these points of friction don't matter, and I certainly wouldn't want anyone to take away that what I'm suggesting is we don't worry about or don't care about our product. It matters, or our service. It matters a lot. And shame on us if we aren't making it a super high priority. What I'm saying is, on its own, it's not enough to significantly change your retention outcomes. It's only one ingredient. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Stay. And if you think about the SaaS subscription business model, this is the ultimate question. And if you can tap into it, my experience is, if you can tap into core reasons why your best customers are staying in spite of the things they're running into and all of the normal challenges that are happening to every company, don't think it's just your company, then if you can tap into that motivation, what's driving them to stay, you can scale that. That's a powerful insight. So I'm huge on this idea, and there was a moment when I actually had been sort of kind of gradually getting to this concept, but there was a moment at an actual customer experience that I had that I'll share, where this really became clear to me. And it was actually, for many years, Apple Inc. was one of my clients, and Apple, fantastic company, but a really challenging customer to have. I mean, their expectations are incredibly high, and they're a very demanding customer. And I'm sure you're thinking of someone in your own, business, a client that's like this, but just constantly dissatisfied and frustrated and complaining and demanding. And in fact, several years this went on, and at one point, my frustration got the better of me, and I was in a meeting at Apple, and I just said, stop, why don't you guys just cancel? If you're so dissatisfied and this is such a frustration for you, and you just don't like it this much, why not just cancel? And the customer looked at me, very quizzical, puzzled look on his face, and just said, well, why would we cancel when you make us so much money? And that was a real, impactful moment for me. And in fact, my first reaction was to feel a little bit embarrassed, because why did I think that it was ever about anything else? Where, in a way, where did we get this idea that delighting and making customers have a positive emotional experience is so core to long-term retention. I get it. A lot of this idea around customer delight, happiness, satisfaction has come to us in a way borrowed from consumer businesses, but most of my clients, all the companies I've worked for, have been B2B companies. And honestly, creating a positive emotional experience for them doesn't tend to be, in my experience, associated with their long-term success or retention. And so if it's not happiness, then, you know, what is it? Well, maybe this sounds oversimplified, but it's my experience that what it is really about is their success. That's what he was expressing to me in that client meeting. Well, this isn't about us being happy. This is about us getting the result that we bought the solution to produce. And so I've run this insight, this intuition through the data, and it's incredibly consistent without fail. And I'll just provide one data point on this, which is that when you can produce measurably the results the customer intended to receive from the beginning, you know, those customers stay a lot longer, on average 4 times longer, but in truth, it varies hugely. It can be as much as 10 times longer, particularly if those results are measurable and you can materialize them to the customer in some way, rather than just vaguely refer to them. So I'm a big fan, and I think it's very important that we find, wherever possible, ways to measure success outcomes in dimensions that the customer agrees are relevant. So measurable success, 400% better retention. And that's very consistent across all the segments we've ever looked at across all our data. And it also maps to my experience. So this is how I put the rule. The only valid reasons to buy are those that are also good reasons to stay. And the reasons to stay are always those that produce durable, and I would say measurable, success. And this is important, right? Because not all reasons to buy are reasons to stay. Think about that first example I taught, but let's talk about a few other examples. It's not just temporary use case. What about, you know, a reason that isn't really the thing we produce? Maybe they're looking for a benefit that's not really one of the compelling benefits our solution produces. Another reason to buy is because we're offering a huge discount. That's not a good reason to buy, because it's not a good reason to stay. A huge discount now translates into normal pricing later. That just means that customer's set up for disappointment and we're misaligned. What about free trials? In my experience, they're toxic to customer success. Free trials, opt-outs, these things drive customer success higher. One of the quickest wins you can get is to eliminate your free trial or your opt-out period. There are so many examples of things we would do in sales to convince someone to buy that have no connection to why they ought to stay in the long run. And I think we should, it behooves all of us to step back and take seriously a look at what we're doing in sales, and many times that's not helping with the long-term connection with that customer. All right, well.
Hey Greg, this is Burke again. As you've approached many of these customer success teams across the the globe and the world, and engaged them in this new concept of finding why their customers stay, have you found that when you ask that, it is very clear to them, or is it very easy for people to answer that question before you start working with them?
That's a really great question, Burke. So let me talk a little bit about how different these experiences are. So I talked about doing these exit analyses, right? One of the things that consistently happens is that, particularly if you ask an open-ended question, why did you leave? And then you manually code those. What I found, and I've seen this over and over again with other people's experience too, is that there's a huge variety of reasons why people leave. Every possible problem with a product or service, plus business issues, plus, I don't know, happiness and satisfaction issues, and you end up with having to compress these, and sometimes kind of heavy-handedly, into categories in order to even create that pie chart where we figure out what the major causes are. And what's that telling me? It tells me that when you ask people that form of the question, which is why did you leave, you get a huge variety of answers. Now, to your question, what happens when you go to your most successful customers? Because, of course, they're the only ones who can answer the question, why are you staying? And you ask them that question in that form. Why are you staying? What you find, and this has been very consistent for years that I've been doing this, is that they come up with actually a very narrow range of answers. There isn't a huge variety of different reasons all over the map why people are staying. And in fact, the typical experience is that there's like one or two. Three is kind of an outlier. And what this tells, I mean, this is an interesting finding, right? You ask why they leave, you come up with a huge variety of answers. You ask why they stay, and there's just one or two. Consistently for those customers that are successful and are sticking around. And what that tells me is should be really fantastic news, I think, to everyone who's doing this. Because if you have to solve for all the reasons they leave, even if that were effective, think how impractical it is, right? There are just dozens, if not hundreds, of different viewpoints on that. But when you look at why customers stay, there's just a couple. And that consistency allows us to build what we really need, which is a consistent customer experience success alignment around just a couple of critical, maybe just one in many cases, critical outcomes. It also makes it clear what metrics. I said it's so important to be able to measure success and not just to talk about it in vague terms. This allows us to solve for that problem. If there were 50 metrics of success, that would be, I would say, impractical for almost any company. Also impractical for the customer to understand it and to share it and to communicate the success broadly in their organization, which is critical, right, to long-term retention. So to me, this is very exciting, right? It was a huge finding for me to discover that the things that matter most aren't all over the map. They're actually very consistent. And I think that's fantastic news. It means that, you know, we're going to talk here in a little bit about how you would go find out what those answers are, a process that I use, I'll share with you. And it means that that's a doable project. It's not some kind of gigantic, complex project, which on our limited resources, which everybody's resources are limited, that they can really do effectively. And so that's great. Anyway, hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think it goes, just imagine coming up with, you know, as I've participated in customer success over 12 years in SaaS, you know, a lot of the conversations have always been around why people are leaving. We have those pie charts. We know what they are. We've had them for months. We know exactly what to do to solve these problems. And so it's this kind of negative vibe. And every once in a while you get slated in there a success story. But when you start thinking and talking to customers who are staying, it seems like it drives a new focus for a company that has this outcome of being positive. And like you mentioned a few slides back, if the importance of the sell driving customer success, just imagine us selling why they're staying versus tons of other features. Just imagine how powerful our messages would be, how powerful our adoption would be. And like, I think it was Laura who sent out there, the ability for us to measure those outcomes based off of these stay reasons is pretty impactful and a new mindset, because a lot of it's negative.
Yeah, no, it's so true. It actually makes what can be kind of a frustrating career. CS people tend to express commonly this sense of frustration that, you know, their results are only measured in negative terms, how many churn, and that they don't always have control over it. And so, you know, that can be very frustrating. I like to think that CS is the coolest thing you can do in business. And I say that with all sincerity, because once you come to understand that it's a set of positive dimensions you're operating on, it just changes the whole experience. Plus, the things we're talking about, connecting and aligning with customers' core reasons to stay, is also really effective. So our experience is, you know, doing a lot of those other things, you can move your retention needle a point or two. You can move it a dozen points or more. We've seen it move 20, 30, 40 points for companies once they realign around this way of thinking. You know, there's another question, Burke, on here that Christopher asked that I think is a great question. Do you mind if I address that one now?
Yeah, go for it. That's great. Thanks.
As a CS organization, at what point do you consider to, quote, fire a customer? either due to gross margin or other factors? Is this detrimental to CS as an org? Are you helping the overall business? I get this question a lot, right? Should we just fire some customers that are misaligned? Because I'm talking about customers that might be, you know, terminally misaligned, right? Well, okay, so backing up, I do want to answer that question, but to set the stage for it, if you think about, oh, let's make sure at the front end that we sell to the core reasons why people will stay. Let's say we kind of focus that down. Well, what's the effect? Is the effect that we just filter out all the customers that had the wrong motivation? Because if that were true, it would probably work from a retention standpoint, but it wouldn't be fabulous for the company overall growth-wise, right? Because all we're doing is just narrowing the aperture and saying, look, only people like this are a good fit. The reality is that customers don't tend to come into the sales process having thought it out really clearly in a systematic and disciplined way. What is our core motivation? What's the overall business purpose driving that motivation, and have we thought about it exactly how it aligns with the benefits of the solution? But they don't have that kind of discipline coming into it. So actually the biggest opportunity on the front end is to help customers align properly with our solution. Very frequently customers come with a feature mindset, right? We're looking for this tool, we need this kind of feature to solve a problem, but they haven't really thought through, how will success be measured? How will we understand, our obligation around adopting this and what we'll have to change, et cetera. So that there's an opportunity, and my experience is it's a huge opportunity on the sales side to align with these core reasons to stay, but to help the customers get there, rather than just say, well, you're not thinking about it right, come back when you do. We would never say that, but there's a process by which I can bring them into alignment, and largely it's by understanding it really well. And so this is another thing that I think is really exciting about being in CS. If your sales process isn't today tightly aligned around these core reasons for people to retain over a long period of time, then why? Who would that have come from, right? Who knows that the best in the organization? The answer is it's the CS teams. These are the people touching and looking inside and watching these customers as they, progress and fail and succeed, et cetera. And there's no group better positioned to create this insight than the CS team. So to me, it's not a problem, it's an opportunity. And the opportunity is you're in the best position to go, run a process where you, and continually, hopefully, constantly, insight into what's causing customers to stay and produce clarity around that the sales team can use. And the way they will use it most effectively is to help customers to align with that. Now, some can't, and we really should be disciplined about not selling to those customers. And that's why one of the reasons I love getting rid of free trials, because that's just not a good reason to buy, and it never will be, and it doesn't help us, in our efforts to try to align well. But there are so many clients that, we're maybe a year in and they're canceling, and we're thinking, man, they could have been aligned. They had the right ingredients, but we just didn't do a good job setting it up right. That intuition is right. And I think that the big opportunity at the front end is for us in the CS world to be pushing clarity. It's not 20 reasons to buy, there's one or two. If you speak to these reasons, customers will align with that, and we'll get better outcomes overall. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Great points to bring up and to answer that question. Thanks a lot.
Sure. And maybe just to answer the question about firing customers. I don't tend to want to fire customers, because my experience is once you tighten up your process around the right reasons to say, the ones who simply can't will fire themselves. And so I like to focus on aligning with them. And by the way, if we can help a prospect align to the right way of thinking, it's still possible to help a current customer align to the right way of thinking. So we should apply the same methodology, as often as we can with our existing customers. And the more insight we gain into that, the more that should be folded into our ongoing customer management process. All right, that's enough on that. Okay, so finally, all right, we've got the right question. We've got some rules set up here. How do you do this? How do you go ahead and find out why customers stay? So my process that I've developed, just one way to do it. I'm sure there's a lot of different ways that it could be done. But to me, this, I've tried a lot of different things. This simple process, and it's the simplest one, works just about as well as anything. And remember, as we step into this, that I talked about how consistent the answers tend to be. So actually, one of the things that would be quite challenging about running a process like this, again, with limited resources that we all have, is if we had to go and do deep dive interviews with dozens and dozens or hundreds of customers. Well, I've done that, and what I've always found is that the reasons are very consistent. So it's surprising how quickly a few interviews can drive you to the right answer. So one of the things that we'll talk about is, this is not a giant multi-month massive data analysis project. This is actually a pretty straightforward project. And by the way, I'm going to overview it right now, but at the end, I'm going to give you a link because we actually have posted our whole process that I use on our website. So you can go download it, and the interview questions are there. Everything you need is there. So it's actually quite simple. So I'll provide that link at the end, and also Burke will have that when he sends it out. Okay, so simple process. First, identify your most successful customers. Now there's a hitch in this. It seems easier than it is. It has a small wrinkle, and that wrinkle is very frequently when we ask CSMs to nominate their most successful customers to be interviewed, what they think is happiest customers, most satisfied customers, or most enjoyable to talk to customers. And of course, as I've been trying to point out, that's not the same thing as most successful. Very frequently, and it's not rare at all, your most successful customers are not fun to talk to. They're not always happy. They're not always expressing sheer joy and delight with your solution, but they are remaining. You can see that they're producing measurable results. They're interesting just as much as the customer who might be pleasant to talk to. It's amazing how many times I'm doing this with a client, and we'll get on a call with a quote, successful customer, and they're delightful to talk to, but we'll find out right then and there on the call that they're actually planning to leave. And it's shocking to people to discover that a customer they thought was bright green is actually flashing red. And it's this mistake. And so I'm just putting it out there. There's this little warning. Don't assume a customer that's happy is successful. What we want is to have some structured criteria around what a successful customer is. And honestly, just sitting down for a few minutes with your team to talk about what is a truly successful customer can be one of the most useful outcomes of a process like this. So yeah, that's the thing to kind of keep in mind when you identify your most successful customers. And you probably need to identify 10 or so, because the goal is to get 5 into an interview. I mean, maybe it's 5, 6. It's not more than 10. And usually we'll nominate 10 and we'll go out and try to get appointments. And for whatever reason, they can't all meet. And so we'll end up being able to interview 5. The thing that's shocking is by the 3rd interview, you're going to say, wow, it's always the same answer in different words, but the same answer. And by the 5th one, you'll be surprised. It really locks in with incredible clarity. And you say, gosh, just 5 interviews can do that? Try it. Try me. Send me an email if you found that there was too much variety after 5. I would love to engage with you. It's not impossible, of course, that there would be a situation like that, but I've never encountered it. It's very consistently, they're talking about the same critical metrics, the same goals, the same set of needs, etc. So, okay, so identify 10 or so really successful customers so you can get 5 or so on the line to interview them, right? Run an interview and find out why they stay. Now, a common wrinkle I hear, common objection I hear on this is, well, gosh, we talk to these guys all the time. We don't really need to interview them again to ask a question we already know the answer to. It's interesting. It's not going to be relevant unless they ask just the right question in just the right form. And again, I'll refer you to our interview guide because it has these questions that I think they're simple, but they get to the core in a different way. And here's just one distinction that I think it's a subtlety, but I think it really matters. When you ask the question, like, are you happy? Are you satisfied? Is this working for you? You get a set of answers. And the thing about customers, they answer the question you ask them, right? So if you ask them, is it working? Or, you're right, is whatever, they'll answer that question. But if you ask them separately, why will you renew next time? Why are you staying with our solution? They'll answer that question, and it does produce a different answer. So beware the tendency to think, well, gosh, we already know, let's not bother them. The second thing I would say about this is you're not bothering them. When you reach out to a customer and say, you're one of our most successful customers, we're running a project to try to understand better why customers like you are so much more successful than others, and we'd appreciate your time. They love it. And the questions themselves, the experience of running through an interview like this, it tends to be a deposit, not a withdrawal from our customer capital account. So don't worry about that. I've never had a customer say, I can't believe you just wasted 45 minutes of my time. Never. What they say is, that was fantastic. I loved sharing with you. Thank you for including me. I mean, it really does tend to improve customer satisfaction to a degree. And I think that that's hopefully something that would prevent you from worrying too much about running a project like this. Because I know we touch those best customers a lot. They get referral requests a lot. They get, you know, all sorts of interview requests, and et cetera, et cetera. But it is worth this one more interview. And given the nature of the questions where we talk about, you know, how successful has it been? How do you measure success? What did you do to, you know, roll this out, and why did you succeed? Who was involved? These questions they're different than the questions we've asked before, and they do produce really interesting new insights. It's not just why they stay, but why they were successful. I'll talk in a minute about why that's so valuable. That set of information, in fact, is some of the most valuable information you can get. And then finally, take that information back and distill it into what I call a customer bullseye or bullseye use case. And it's not about taking all of your notes and just, you know, slamming them into a 10-page document. Actually, it's simple, and you'll see we have a little template on our guide that you can download, and it's simple. It's what are the 1 or 2 or maybe 3 most important reasons customers our successful customers are saying they're staying. You know, what is the process that this fits into inside their organization? Is this part of the analysis and decision process? Is it part of a production or operations or whatever? Find out, you know, how does this fit into their world? What process are we part of? And it ends up being extremely crisp. And what's nice is once you've condensed that, it's just 1 page. It's less words. It's very, very limited. What we want is concise, right? That's something you can then share with everyone else in the company. Think about it. Sales now has a clear concept of the customer logic that drives the best results. They can go out now and find customers like that in marketing, sales. They can also guide customers to that way of thinking about it. It just really shapes how well they are able to align. And you know, what they want to know, if you're in sales, what you want to know is, can this help me close more? And the answer is, actually it does. We have consistently seen this in the data. Even though it sounds like they're kind of narrowing their focus, what they're really doing is accelerating the ability of a customer to understand why this is actually a very compelling offering for them. And so it tends to improve close rates. So they, you know, at first they might be a little hesitant, but you're actually giving them a gift. And the more you're able to communicate that to them, how this makes their life easier, faster, and more effective, they will see it. The best reps will see it. You'll notice that. By the way, back when I talked about which reps have the highest retention performance, it's those reps that actually tend to like this the most. So if you've never measured them by their retention performance, you can get a pretty good proxy idea of how well they do in long-term retention by watching how enthusiastic they are about having you share this customer bullseye with them. All right, so that's the simple process. Again, I have that available. Here's the link. You can go to our website and download that for free. And it has things like, I said, the interview guide with the questions. It has the bullseye template. It also has boilerplate email you can send out, you know, to ask people to invite people to participate for your customers, et cetera. So it has an agenda for the call, et cetera. So everything you need is there, and it's not that complicated. This is something that one or two people on your team could do, I mean, 2 weeks easily, or maybe less. You could probably do it in a week. And that's something that, you know, I feel like it's a relatively easy and accessible thing, but a huge insight, and one that's not in. Hopefully now you can see this kind of insight will never come out of an exit analysis. Whether you choose to continue to do exit analyses or not, this is a distinctly different thing. I don't do exit analyses anymore. I just haven't ever found them to be of any use. But even if you continue doing that for whatever reason, add this, because it rounds out that view. And what you'll find is that the reasons to stay are not the inverse of the reasons to leave. They're actually unrelated. Reasons to leave tend to be problems and issues. Reasons to stay tend to be results. And I think that's a really important distinction, kind of generally thinking about, well, what's our overall methodology for customer success? What's our overall view of it? Are we here to reduce friction and eliminate problems? Well, I hope somebody is, because it's not a trivial thing. It matters. You should be looking for ways to reduce friction always. And shame on us if we don't. But what I'm saying is it's not enough. And I believe, I'm actually a fan of the title customer success. I think it has been diluted, and maybe the original clarity of that concept has been lost a little bit. We need to regain that, because the idea of us existing to help customers achieve success is very different than us addressing problems and removing obstacles. It means there's a whole additional skill set and musculature around customers changing how they work to get the results our solution enables and promises. And so it's more than just removing obstacles. It's reaching into their world and helping them know what are the critical behaviors to achieve these results.
Yeah, so awesome, Greg. Thanks for explaining that. We're going to move into the Q&A time, but just before we go there, I mean, think about this for a second. What Greg's kind of talked about, some data to talk that supports this, and we've even here at ClientSuccess, we've started. You know, we're big friends and fans of Greg, so we've been doing this, and it's been game changing. How it's helping change, like you said back a slide ago, our marketing, our sales, our onboarding, our outcomes, like how we're actually driving our business. But think about this, instead of being a group of customer success professionals who come into every meeting saying, hey, we need a product, update this, or hey, these are the reasons we're not having success, but walking into an executive meeting or even the board and say, hey, you know what? These are reasons why people stay. And some of us might be surprised on why people are staying. And we go, wow, you know what? We know that's why they stay, but we don't even really market that. Or we don't really onboard that. We're really still too feature rich in the way we're doing things or talking about our product. I think it's really, I love this, why we wanted to bring you on to this community to share this great insight, because it's helped us in the last little bit as we've been diving into why customers stay. Let me ask you one question. So at the first, you talked about, you know, the retention number. And so there was a little bit of the chat in there that was saying, you know, when you're calling retention or increasing that, are you talking about dollar or logo? And what have you seen been most successful about focusing on that?
Great question. I get it a lot. The quick version of the answer is that both matter a lot, but they have slightly different meanings. So when we're talking to our board and we're reporting our results, we tend to want to focus on dollar retention. Dollar retention tends to be better than logo retention, obviously, because we tend to retain bigger accounts better than we retain smaller accounts. By the way, that is an extremely consistent reality across the data. If you have a very wide range from very small accounts to very large accounts, you'll notice that segmenting them by size produces very different retention results. And you should probably have different retention targets, both logo and dollar, in those segments. But the point being that dollars tends to be how we report results to our boards, et cetera. Logo retention, though, I think is quite important and has been underappreciated. And here's why. You can't expand an account you don't have anymore. And we have we've failed to appreciate that if we don't separately measure logo retention, we're often missing some of the reasons. Now, here's the other thing. A lot of times with retention, churn, et cetera, the way we measure can be difficult, right? If we just say we have 10% churn or 10% or 90% retention, whatever, that's an interesting number, but I have absolutely no idea what to do with it. Just the fact that you report a percent doesn't tell me why they're leaving. But if we're able to separate out logos and dollars, we already have an additional insight. And then we want to look deeper, right? We really want to understand, again, why customers are staying. So dollars versus logos, I like to do both. I prefer to use logo retention internally as a way of measuring our performance. But it's also a leading indicator, meaning if you want to see how good our dollar retention will be 6 months down the road, look at our logo retention now or a year down the road. Because again, you can't charge, you can't bill or expand an account you no longer have. So I think it's a more brutal and therefore more useful internal performance metric that I recommend people use.
Yeah. Great thoughts on that. And now early on in the presentation, when you were talking about, is there a correlation between sales and customer success? One of the questions was asked by Dan. He said, hey, are you saying that client retention is tied to the success of their salesperson? That was from Dan, yeah.
Okay. Well, there are two ways I could interpret the question. I'll answer both versions. The one way I interpret that question is, should it be tied to their performance? In other words, should we pay based on their retention performance? A lot of companies do. I think it's a good idea. Exactly how to formulate that ought to be up to every company, but there should be a way for a salesperson to be remunerated for high retention performance and penalized for extraordinarily low performance, because as I've shown, there's a huge range. Some salespeople are associated with very high churn. It's good to know who they are too, because it's possible maybe they shouldn't be on the team, or we could work on skills for them. The other version of the question is, is it tied, which has a slightly different answer. That is to say, and I had mentioned this just briefly when I was talking about it, but it tends to be true that although there's a disparity between high sales performers and high retention performers, they don't tend to be the same people always. So it's not always the case that those closing the most deals are also retaining the most deals. In fact, it would be tempting to say they're inversely related. That is, the person who's slamming deals through the system might be doing so in a sloppy way and leading to churn. That could be true, but I haven't found that to be consistently true. I've just found that they're just not consistently the same person. And my experience is, if you can get alignment around the core reasons to stay and build a clear bullseye and refocus sales and marketing efforts around that, everybody's performance overall tends to go up. And I don't just mean in retention. That will go up significantly. But even at the sales level, you'll tend to see marginal improvements in close rates and deal flow. By the way, another metric that you should watch, if you have a business model where pricing is variable, is you'll also tend to see deals not only close more often, but for higher dollars. And there are good reasons for that, but largely the intuition is you're tying into what matters most to the client and correctly aligning with that. So they tend to be more motivated. Does that answer? I mean, there were two answers there, but hopefully I got somewhere close to what you were looking for.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Well, hey, our time's up. This is our power hour of the Customer Success webinar series. Each month, we try to bring thought leaders and challenge some of the thought out there in customer success. It's time to elevate. Our CEO, Dave Blake, talks a lot about that. He says, hey, as customer success, even as new as this is and as it's tied and has its roots in account management, how do we elevate and take this to the next level? And I think focusing on what Greg has taught us today, have it be very clear. Like, I challenge you this, to take what Greg's asked us today. Grab a whiteboard right now and write on it why customers stay. And answer that question. And really, truly, I think that's going to help us elevate, like our CEO, Dave Blake, has been challenging us, to the next level of customer success. So wherever you were found in the world, we're recording this webinar. We'll send it to you. We've provided a link to get you started on conducting success analysis. Think about that. Customer success is about helping people stay and helping people grow. the other side, we're trying to be firefighters and churn people. I don't know, that's not that fun to go to a company every day and think that. But on a company that's thinking about helping their customers stay and grow, that's a new, powerful, elevated idea. So wherever you are out there, Greg, thank you very much for being part of this webinar series. And for everyone else, we'll catch you next month in the Client Success, Customer Success webinar series. We'll see you soon. Go out there and help people stay. Thanks.